He slid the contract across the table. Marriage for 5 years. You get $10 million. I get my green card and business connections. What this billionaire didn't know, I never settle for being just a transaction. I was about to flip his whole world upside down. If you've ever felt underestimated or treated like you're less than you deserve, stick around. This story isn't just about love. It's about knowing your worth and making others see it too. Hit subscribe, and let's get into how I turned a business transaction into a billionaire's biggest weakness, his heart. I never planned to marry for anything but love. Growing up in Detroit, my parents instilled in me the importance of independence and education. Make your own money, Zara, my mother would say. A man can leave, but your degree never will. And I listened. After graduating top of my class at Howard University, I landed at Goldman Sachs, climbing the corporate ladder despite the whispers and stares. 10 years in, I became one of the few black female VPs in wealth management, handling portfolios worth billions. I built my success brick by brick, each one laid with twice the effort my colleagues seemed to need. That night at the Metropolitan Museum Charity Gala, I was there representing our firm's foundation. Alexander Chen, billionaire tech mogul and one of Asia's most eligible bachelors, wasn't on my radar until we both reached for the same glass of champagne. "I believe that one's mine," he said with a slight accent, his eyes assessing me like I was a potential acquisition. Something flickered in his gaze, respect maybe, when I handed him my business card. "Impressive credentials," he noted, scanning it. "I'd like to discuss a potential arrangement. Dinner tomorrow." I almost declined, but curiosity won. Over a private dinner at his penthouse, he laid out his proposition with clinical precision. "My visa situation is complicated. My expansion into American markets requires stability and connections only citizenship can provide." He paused, sipping his wine. Marriage to an American, a successful, respected professional, would solve this problem efficiently. The offer came next, $10 million for 5 years of marriage, then a clean divorce. "A business arrangement, nothing more," he emphasized. "We both benefit." I laughed in his face. Then I got the call about my father's heart attack. The experimental procedure he needed wasn't covered by insurance, $2 million out of pocket. My siblings couldn't help. Our family savings wouldn't come close. When I called Alexander to reconsider, his voice betrayed no surprise. The contract was 42 pages long. My lawyer whistled when she read it. Separate residences allowed but public appearances required. Minimum of 3 social media posts weekly. Family holidays to be shared alternately. Prenuptial agreement watertight. The final clause: physical intimacy not required nor expected. I signed my name with a steady hand, telling myself this was just another business deal. Our courtship began the following week. Carefully orchestrated dates at Michelin-starred restaurants. Weekend trips captured by conveniently placed paparazzi. His arm around my waist, always precisely 3 inches of space between us. I learned to smile like I was in love while mentally reviewing portfolio spreadsheets. "You're quite good at this," he whispered during our engagement party. I whispered back, "So are you." Neither of us mentioned the countdown clock we both felt ticking. 5 years until freedom, 5 years until my payday. Our wedding was a spectacle straight out of a magazine. 500 guests at the Plaza Hotel, orchids flown in from Thailand, a custom Vera Wang gown that cost more than my first apartment. Alexander spared no expense making it look authentic. "Perception creates reality," he reminded me as we practiced our first dance. I remember the weight of my diamond ring, how it felt like handcuffs despite its beauty. When he kissed me at the altar, his lips barely touched mine, technical fulfillment of a contractual obligation. The applause sounded hollow to my ears. The sprawling penthouse we shared might as well have been 2 separate planets. Alexander took the east wing, I claimed the west. We established careful routines to avoid unexpected encounters. He rose at 5 a.m. for his morning workout. I waited until 6:30. Breakfast was taken separately, dinner together, only when staff was present. The rare times we crossed paths in the hallway, he'd nod politely, as if I were a colleague from a department he didn't quite remember. At night, I'd sometimes stand at my window, watching the city lights, wondering if he did the same from his side of our gilded cage. I learned about my husband primarily through observation. Alexander worked constantly, his home office light glowing until 3 a.m. most nights. He took calls in Mandarin, Japanese, and English, moving between languages with fluid precision. His calendar was managed to the minute by a team of assistants. Foods arranged by nutritional value, not taste. Exercise tracked by performance metrics. Even his charitable donations were calculated for maximum tax efficiency. Everything in his life seemed to have a purpose except me. I was merely decoration, a means to an end. The first time I saw beneath this perfectly constructed facade was 3 months into our marriage. A deal in Singapore had collapsed. I gathered that much from the phone calls that had been coming all day. Past midnight, I went to the kitchen for tea and heard something from his office. The door was slightly ajar. Alexander sat at his desk, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. He was crying, not just a few dignified tears, but deep, racking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere primal. I stood frozen, watching this stranger who was my husband break apart. Before I could decide whether to speak, he looked up and saw me. The shame and vulnerability in his eyes vanished instantly, replaced by that familiar clinical distance. "A momentary lapse," he said, straightening his tie. "It won't happen again." Something shifted in me that night. This man who had reduced marriage to a business transaction was still human, after all. The next morning, I left coffee outside his door. Black, 2 sugars, the way I'd noticed he drank it. He never mentioned it, but the empty cup appeared outside my door later that day. A small acknowledgement, the smallest possible connection, but it was something. Gradually, I began testing the boundaries, leaving books I thought he might enjoy on the coffee table, asking actual questions at our staged public dinners instead of reciting our rehearsed small talk. Sometimes I caught him watching me with puzzled interest, as if trying to solve an equation with too many variables. "You don't need to do this," he told me once. "The contract doesn't require personal investment." I just smiled and replied, "I know." What I didn't say was that living as strangers under one roof was slowly suffocating me. That maybe I could teach this human calculator something about connection. That maybe we both deserved more than what we'd settled for. Act 3. The Transformation. "You want me to do what?" Alexander stared at me like I'd suggested we fly to Mars for dinner. It was our 6th month of marriage, and I'd just invited him to my parents' home for Sunday dinner. "It's not in the agreement," he said, flipping through his mental copy of our contract. I laughed, a genuine one that seemed to startle him. "Not everything has to be in writing, Alexander. Sometimes people just do things." The confusion on his face was almost endearing. He agreed reluctantly, probably calculating the PR value of being seen embracing his wife's family. My mother's house in Detroit was everything our Manhattan penthouse wasn't: warm, cluttered, alive with stories. Family photos crowded every surface. The furniture was well worn, and the kitchen smelled of my grandmother's recipes. Alexander stood in the doorway like a visitor from another planet, designer suit, uncomfortably formal among the casual gathering. But my family, there's something special. They welcomed him without question, my father clapping him on the back, my nieces and nephews immediately asking if he knew how to play Uno. By evening, he was sitting at our old piano with my youngest niece, awkwardly following her 5-year-old instructions. I caught him smiling, not the practiced smile from our photo opportunities, but something unsure and genuine. On the flight home, he was quiet. "Your family is Unusual, he finally said. I raised an eyebrow. They treat each other with genuine affection. It's inefficient, but compelling. It wasn't a declaration of changed values, but it was a crack in the foundation. That night, he ate dinner at the table with me instead of in his office. Small steps. Of course, vulnerability didn't come easy to him. When I tried sharing stories from my childhood, he'd listen politely, but offer nothing in return. When I asked about his parents, he'd answer in brief, factual sentences. My father built his company from nothing. My mother managed our household. They provided everything necessary. It took time to understand what he wasn't saying, that necessity had never included affection, that he'd been raised to see emotions as inefficiencies, relationships as transactions. Then came the Watson tech crisis. A security breach had exposed millions of user accounts in Alexander's main American acquisition. Share prices were plummeting, and the board was considering pulling out of the deal entirely. I found him in his office at 2 a.m., surrounded by reports and projections, looking more defeated than I'd ever seen him. Having spent years managing crisis communications for high-profile clients, I understood exactly what needed to happen. "Let me help," I said, and to my surprise, he didn't refuse. We worked side by side for 3 days straight. I drafted statements, coached him through press conferences, strategized with his team. Our complementary skills created something neither of us could have managed alone. When the crisis finally stabilized, we collapsed on the office couch, exhausted but triumphant. "We make a good team," he said, his shoulder touching mine. It was the first time he'd acknowledged us as equals, as partners. "We do," I agreed, and something shifted in the air between us. That night, over a late dinner, the walls came down. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was the shared victory, but Alexander started talking, really talking, about growing up with the crushing weight of family expectations. About being sent to boarding school at 8, his father's only communication being monthly performance reports. About building his empire to prove his worth. I found myself sharing too. My fears, my ambitions, the real reasons behind accepting his proposal beyond my father's medical bills. For the first time, we weren't performing for an audience or fulfilling contractual obligations. We were just two people, seeing each other clearly. "I've never told anyone these things," he admitted, looking almost surprised at himself. I reached across the table and took his hand. He didn't pull away. "Maybe it's time you started," I said. The look in his eyes, wonder mixed with terror, told me he was standing at the edge of something new, unsure whether to step forward or retreat to safer ground. But when his phone rang with another crisis call, he did something unprecedented. He turned it off. "It can wait until morning," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. That's when I knew something fundamental had changed. For a man who measured life in productive minutes and quarterly returns, choosing presence over business wasn't just unusual. It was revolutionary. They say happiness comes before the fall. For us, it was 3 blissful months of rediscovering each other outside the constraints of our contract. Weekend trips, where we actually spent time together instead of just posing for photos. Late-night conversations that had nothing to do with business or appearances. Alexander even started cooking. Terrible at first, then surprisingly decent as he approached it with the same determination he gave everything else. "Relationships require effort," he explained seriously, as if reciting from a manual he'd secretly been studying. It was endearing, watching this man who negotiated billion-dollar deals struggle to understand the simplest aspects of human connection. But reality has a way of intruding. The first tremor came during a dinner with Alexander's parents, who had flown in from Shanghai. They were polite but cold, assessing me like an underperforming investment. "Your American wife seems spirited," his mother said in Mandarin, not realizing I'd been studying the language. Alexander tensed beside me. "She is accomplished and intelligent," he replied. his hand finding mine under the table. His father's disapproving glance spoke volumes. Later, I overheard them arguing, his father insisting this marriage was meant to be strategic, not emotional. "You're losing focus," he accused. "This woman is distracting you from what matters." The whispers spread through Alexander's business circles. A competitor leaked rumors that he'd gone soft since marrying me, that his judgment was compromised by sentiment. Board members questioned decisions that prioritized ethical considerations over maximum profit. "They're using me against you," I said one night, the realization both painful and infuriating. Alexander dismissed my concerns. "It doesn't matter what they think." But I saw how the pressure wore on him, how he began spending more hours at the office again, trying to prove nothing had changed. Doubt crept in like a slow poison. Was what we'd built real, or just another kind of performance? Had I simply become a different type of business asset, no longer a path to citizenship, but now a humanizing influence, a socially responsible face for his corporate empire? Some nights I'd catch him watching me, with an expression I couldn't quite read, and I'd wonder if he was calculating the cost-benefit analysis of loving me. Our contract included a midpoint review, a chance to assess whether the arrangement was still working for both parties. 2.5 years in, we sat at opposite ends of our dining table, lawyers present but asked to wait outside. The terms of our agreement lay between us, clinical and cold against the warmth we'd cultivated. "You've fulfilled all obligations exemplarily," Alexander said, his voice slipping into that formal tone I hadn't heard in months. "If you wish to exit the agreement early, I'm prepared to pay the full amount now." The offer hung in the air. An easy out, $10 million and my freedom, with no penalty, everything I'd originally wanted. But all I could think was, he's giving me a choice without revealing what he wants, always protecting himself, always leaving an escape route. "Is that what you want?" I asked directly. "Do you want me to leave?" His face remained carefully neutral. "I want what benefits you most," he replied, the perfect diplomatic answer that told me nothing. Something broke inside me then. After everything we'd shared, he still couldn't, or wouldn't, be honest about his feelings. "I need time to think," I said, pushing back from the table. That night, I packed a bag and went to stay with my sister. "This isn't about the contract," I told him before leaving. "This is about whether what we have is real or just another transaction with different terms." The hurt in his eyes seemed genuine, but I'd become too unsure to trust my own judgment. For 2 weeks, we lived separate lives again. He called daily at first, then respected my request for space. I wrestled with impossible questions. If he'd never needed this marriage for business, would he have chosen me? If I'd never needed the money, would I have given him a chance? Where did the performance end and the truth begin? Meanwhile, business news reported Alexander throwing himself into work, negotiating deals with a ruthlessness that hadn't been seen in years. His father was quoted praising his return to form. It felt like watching him erase everything we'd built, reverting to the man I'd first met, calculating, distant, driven solely by achievement. On the 15th day, I made my decision. I would ask for a clean break if he couldn't choose me openly, completely, without the safety net of our contract. Then, what we had wasn't strong enough to build a life on. I was worth more than being someone's compromise. As I packed the rest of my things from our penthouse, preparing for the conversation that would end our complicated journey, I reminded myself that some lessons are worth the pain they teach us. I had learned to demand authenticity, to accept nothing less than being wholly chosen. He had given me that gift, at least, even if he couldn't give me himself. I was halfway through packing when my phone exploded with notifications. Texts from friends, calls from family, news alerts, all saying the same thing. Alexander was giving a press conference. Live, unscheduled. I turned on the television just as he stepped up to the podium, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. He looked different, his usual impeccable suit replaced by a simple button-down, no tie. His hair slightly disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it, more human than I'd ever seen him in public. "I called this press conference to address the rumors about my marriage and my company," he began, his voice steady but without its usual practice polish. "For most of my life, I've measured success through acquisitions, market share, and profit margins. I believed relationships were transactional, that everything and everyone had a price and a purpose." He paused, looking directly into the camera, as if he knew I was watching. I was wrong. My heart stopped as he continued. 2.5 years ago, I married Zara Thompson in what began as a business arrangement. I needed American citizenship. She needed funds for her father's medical treatment. It was meant to be a simple exchange of assets. Gasps rippled through the press corps. My phone started ringing. My mother, my best friend, my lawyer. I ignored them all, unable to tear my eyes from the screen. What I never accounted for was Zara herself, her integrity, her compassion, her refusal to be reduced to a transaction. His voice wavered slightly. She taught me that real connection can't be quantified or controlled, that vulnerability isn't weakness but courage, that a life measured only in achievements is no life at all. He stepped away from the podium, ignoring the shouted questions. "My board of directors has issued an ultimatum. Return to business as usual, or face a vote of no confidence. My father has threatened to withdraw family investment. Several major clients have paused negotiations." A small, genuine smile crossed his face. "And for the first time in my life, I don't care. Some things matter more." Looking straight into the camera again, he said, "Zara, if you're watching, I'm tearing up our contract. Not because I want out, but because I want in. Completely. No terms, no conditions, no escape clauses. Just us, figuring it out day by day like everyone else. I can't promise I'll always get it right. I will probably still check my phone during dinner sometimes. I might still struggle to express what I feel, but I promise to try every day to be worthy of you, not as a business partner, but as a husband who loves you." The doorbell rang. I opened it to find Alexander standing there, slightly out of breath like he'd run all the way from the press conference. "I didn't know if you'd be watching," he said. In his hand was our contract, all 42 pages. Without breaking eye contact, he tore it in half, then quarters, letting the pieces fall to the floor. "I choose you," he said simply. "No deals, no conditions, just us." I'd prepared myself for so many scenarios, rehearsed so many final conversations. But faced with this man who'd risked everything, his company, his family's approval, his carefully constructed identity, I found myself speechless. "How do I know this isn't just another performance?" I finally asked, needing to be sure. He took my hand and placed it over his heart. I could feel it racing beneath my palm. "Because I'm terrified," he admitted, his voice raw with honesty. "I've never wanted anything I couldn't ensure through strategy and resources. I have no guarantee you'll stay. Loving you is the biggest risk I've ever taken." The vulnerability in his eyes was answer enough. The months that followed weren't easy. His board did call that vote of no confidence, though enough members stood with him to prevent removal. Several major clients withdrew. His father didn't speak to him for nearly a year. But other things flourished. We established a foundation focusing on medical care for underserved communities, inspired by my father's experience. Alexander's more ethical business approach attracted new partners who shared our values. Most importantly, we began building a life based on choice rather than obligation. 6 months after that press conference, we held a second ceremony. Just family and close friends on a beach at sunset. No photographers, no designer dress, no performance. When we exchanged vows this time, they were our own words, not legal clauses. His mother surprised us by attending, tentatively beginning to rebuild their relationship. My father, healthy and strong, thanks to his successful procedure, walked me down the aisle. People often ask what changed him, how a man so calculating could transform so completely. The truth is more nuanced. Alexander didn't become a different person, he became more fully himself. The ambition and brilliance that built his empire now work alongside compassion and connection. He still strategizes and analyzes, but not at the expense of what matters most. As for me, I learned that sometimes the most powerful negotiation tactic is walking away. Not as manipulation, but as a genuine assertion of worth. That love isn't about finding someone who's perfect, but someone willing to grow alongside you. That sometimes the things we think we want, security, success, control, pale compared to being truly seen and chosen. Last week marked our 5th anniversary, the point when our original contract would have ended. Instead of separation papers, Alexander presented me with a journal documenting our journey, from that first champagne glass to now. On the final page, he'd written, "The best deal I ever made was the one I was willing to break." I couldn't have said it better myself. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real talk about relationships, self-worth, and breaking barriers. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded of their power to change someone's world. Remember, when you know your worth, others will recognize it too. Drop a comment telling me what part of my journey hit home for you.